Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. This week, I'm going to be covering some Bigfoot sightings in my home state of New York. And the main reason for that is because last weekend I attended the first annual New York Bigfoot Conference up in Fulton County, New York, in Johnstown. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So if you want to fast forward to just get to the stories, timestamps will be below for all the different chapters. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bigfoot Conference. It was the first annual one. So let me get into that a little bit. So, yeah, I had mentioned the New York Bigfoot Conference on the show a few times previously. And like I said, it was held in Johnstown, New York, which is just minutes away from where my buddy Scott lives. And Josh used to live there, and he lives about 40 miles west now, um, 40 minutes west. I don't know how many miles it is. But so we all wanted to go up and see this conference, and there were some really cool speakers scheduled. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who has since passed, so he was not able to attend, but Cliff Barrickman, Renee Holland, Adam Davies, Steve Culls, and Dr. Esteban Sarmiento were all doing presentations, and it was a really cool event. The first night was a town hall, kind of like what you would see on Finding Bigfoot. So it was just local people attending and discussing their Bigfoot stories, their sightings, their experiences with sounds and tree knocks and footprints. And there were some interesting stories. A lot of the people there really, they were local, but their experiences, if they did have any, were not really from New York. So I was hoping to sort of network with some people there and get some guests on the show, but the stories overall weren't too impressive, and the ones that were not from New York. So it was still great hearing those stories, though, but not enough to really build an entire episode out of, very quick glimpses of things or just finding footprints, things like that. So very cool. And another thing is, the next day when they had the actual conference, they had it was like an hour prior that you can go out and kind of see the vendors. And a lot of the speakers were sitting outside. And we actually got to speak to Renee Holland, just our group. So it was like me, Scott, his wife Becky, and my son Jake, and we were just talking to Renee for, God, had to be like a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, one-on-one with her, and really interesting. And sort of, you got to sort of forget what you see on TV, because they edit it to make her look like this staunch skeptic. And I guess that's just TV for you, reality TV. They're going to edit things to look a certain way, to have people look a certain way. Bobo's got to be the big doofus, sort of, and Matt Moneymaker is the leader, and Renee is the staunch skeptic, and she's really not. So it was really fascinating talking to her, and I really appreciate her taking the time to speak with us. And again, I don't necessarily agree with her on everything, but she's not the skeptic that TV made her out to be, that Finding Bigfoot made her out to be. So yeah, really interesting speaking to her. I also got to meet Dr. Esteban Sarmiento, who's a great guy, very funny, very smart, very charismatic. He did an excellent presentation. He was running around a lot, so I didn't get to spend too much time with him, but he took a picture with me, so I appreciate that. And I hope to see him again sometime soon, because he was just a great presenter. And again, a skeptic who's open to the possibility, and not one of these jerk skeptics who just puts you down for believing in it. He believes we need a body before he will fully accept it, or science will fully accept it. And I appreciate that, but I appreciate that he brings attention to this as well and says, look, this, whether it's real or not, it deserves some attention. So I did appreciate that. Ken Gerhardt was there as well. I didn't get to meet him. I'm sorry, listener Darren Blaine. I know I was trying to meet with him, but it was one of those things where there's only so many hours in the day. And like I said, we spent a lot of time with Renee, and then we didn't get to speak with Cliff. I spoke with Steve Culls a little bit, but I've met him a few times and spoken to him a few times prior. But it was good speaking with him as well. But yeah, Cliff, I didn't really get to speak to. Adam Davies, I didn't really get to speak to. So a great event, and they are going to be doing it again next year. So check it out. From what I understand, things are already in motion, and it looks like it's definitely happening. So keep an eye on that. I will, of course, promote that as I get more information. But this was great. It was a great event, And I'm so glad it was like right near where I always go up to hang out with Scott and Becky and Josh, and, just kind of at the southern end, the foothills of the Adirondacks there. So it was a great event. I'm hoping next year for a better turnout, maybe some better stories. Um, Again, the stories this year were good, but not enough to really make an episode out of. I also want to give a shout out to Mike Stetton. Mike and I have been talking for a long time. He lives up there. He knows Josh. He knows Scott. And he's been collecting a lot of Bigfoot stories from the area. And hopefully he will share them with me one day. But Mike and I, we had never met. We had just kind of spoken on the phone, and we talk a lot through Facebook. But I ran into him as the conference was ending, and we got to chat for 15 minutes or so. So that was great. Mike, it was good meeting you finally in person and speaking. And I hope to do so again at some point. But yeah, New York Bigfoot Conference, it was great. And thanks to Loretta for setting that all up. And, the tickets were great. The speakers were great. It was awesome. So definitely look out for that one next year, because we don't get too many of these on the East Coast, like in New York. And like I said, it wasn't like in Buffalo or Rochester, somewhere really far, prohibitively far from us. It was right down the road from Scott and Josh, and just great to be able to go see these people speak. So awesome. Let's get to some Bigfoot stories. All right. So this week we're going to be doing some more upstate New York. Not quite the Adirondacks. Some of these counties have portions of their counties in the actual Adirondacks, but not all of them. And I've done other counties before. I've done Fulton, so I will link to those episodes down below if you want to go back and check them out. We were in Fulton, but I've done episodes on Fulton, Hamilton. Josh and I hike and camp a lot in Hamilton, so I've done some of those. Warren County, I think I've done some for like Sabbath Point. I think I've even done some for Essex County. But tonight we're going to be looking at Lewis County, Oneida County, and Madison County. So some cool stories tonight. So let's get into them. But if you're watching here on YouTube or on Spotify, any of the video platforms, you can kind of see the Adirondacks are here, and you have Whitehall to the east and Warren and Essex. Lewis and Oneida County, that they have, the Adirondacks do cross into those, but this is more just general upstate New York, or I don't know what's considered upstate New York. I'm from the city, so I mean the North Bronx is technically for me that's like upstate. So let us get into some New York stories. All right, story number one. This is from Lewis County, New York, and this is a recent one. This happened just June 29th of 2025, this summer. So we'll get into this one. Hikers hear knocks from multiple directions 10 miles south of Watertown, and this is submitted by witness Dylan Kelly. And I usually don't do the tree knock stuff, but there's some other things in this story that make it a little bit more interesting to me than just, oh, I heard a knock in the woods, and so it must be Bigfoot. I like the corroborating evidence and corroborating stuff around it. Again, it doesn't mean it was definitely Bigfoot or even possibly Bigfoot, but I do like when there's something more than just a knock or just a howl. Like, I need something more to build up that story. So let's get into what Dylan reports here. So again, there's some very specific coordinates here for the location details. The nearest town is Lowville, and the nearest road is State Route 177. And observed, my 11-year-old daughter, my 7-month-old Belgian Malinois, and myself went for a hike in the Tug Hill Forest in Lewis County, New York. We hiked about 2 miles in on the trail to the falls. At this point, the dog started acting alert, but I attributed that to a helicopter from Fort Drum passing overhead. They use that area for helicopter training. The deer flies were heavy. We decided to turn back. Right as we turned to walk back down the trail, I heard 3 distinct knocks in a rhythm. So almost like not just dun, 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 like a rhythm, evenly spaced. This was somewhat close. I didn't pay attention to it until I heard another 3 knocks in the same rhythm further away. So is this an echo? Is this something responding? Who knows? But he's saying it's like the same 3 in the same rhythm. I looked to where the dog was putting his attention to and did not see anything. As we all turned to continue back down the trail, we heard again the 3-knock rhythm from even further away. Once I started to pay closer attention to the sound, I realized there was a lack of normal wood noise as well, so that's something to pay attention to. I would say all of this happened between 1 and 2 minutes. After the 3rd set of knocks, we did not hear anything else. The dog stayed alert the whole time until we got out onto the main trail that goes to the parking area. Yes, I felt like something was not so much following, us, but watching us. After getting back to the truck, we talked about it, what my daughter thought it might be, and what I thought it might be. As we are frequently in the woods, you hear all sorts of noises, but when you hear something that stands out and is out of place, that gets your attention. And that is something I've mentioned on the show previously. On the way out, I checked the hiking register, and there was no one there that day at all. I read into the theories of wood knocking, and from there figured I would report this so there is a record. I know it is not a sighting, so to speak, but could be of interest to Bigfoot researchers to follow up at some point. So also noticed nothing odd, a lot of coyote prints and some bear prints. It was just him and his daughter and their dog. Other stories, he's not aware of any other stories. Over in Port Linden, there are some stories of something big along the Moose River, but nothing I have experienced. My experience is more up on Tug Hill. So this is around 1 PM. He says it's mainly deciduous forest mixed with some pines here and there, pine, maple, oak trees, moss on the ground, streams that form from the water runoff. Typical sort of Adirondack, upstate New York terrain. There's a waterfall back there that is clean. Not many people come here at any given time, popular for hunting in the fall. So to analyze this one, again, I said I don't usually like the tree knocks, but there are some interesting things here to note. The first one is the dog. I always try to pay attention to animals. You know, they have a better sense of hearing, sense of smell, sense of sight. When a dog starts acting weird, pay attention to it. And again, that doesn't mean that it's Bigfoot, but it could be a big cat in the area. It could be a bear. It could be another person. But when your dog starts acting weird and paying attention to certain things, pay attention to that because it's something you need to be alerted to. This is why dogs were domesticated. Like our ancestors knew this. They knew that dogs were good at sniffing things out, pardon the pun, but they knew when something was coming long before we did. So that's something to pay attention to. The second thing is that these knocks, a lot of people will hear one knock, and it could be a branch falling, it could be a tree, just the wood expanding or contracting due to the temperature, and they hear something, and oh my God, that's Bigfoot. This doesn't sound natural. You're hearing a rhythm. You're hearing the same rhythm, and then you're hearing it close, you're hearing it a little further away, and then even further away. So it almost sounds like something responding or communicating. And could this be other people in the woods, other Bigfoot hunters just knocking and they're all talking to each other? Of course. So, something to be open to, but it's interesting that it was more than just a knock or two knocks. It was this rhythmic 3 and he heard it 3 times. So 3 times 3, just really interesting. Another factor, lack of normal wood noises. So we hear this a lot in Bigfoot stories and people don't necessarily notice it at first, or sometimes they will notice it before they see Bigfoot or have the experience, that there's nothing else going on in the woods. And a skeptic is going to say, well, now your attention is focused only on the knocks or on the thing that you're seeing, so you're not hearing anything else. Your brain is kind of filtering it out. But as I said, a lot of times it's these things that happen first. So they're not seeing Bigfoot and getting scared. They're getting scared first and then seeing Bigfoot. And in this case, he hears the knocks and then he notices that the normal wood noises have stopped, which again is a sign of a predator. It doesn't necessarily mean Bigfoot, but we hear that a lot in Bigfoot sightings. The normal animals kind of stay quiet because they don't want to get eaten. The last thing, and this is like an instinctual thing, he felt like they were being watched, not being followed, but he says, they just got this sense that they were being watched. And they checked the trail register. There's nobody else in there. And that doesn't mean there's nobody else in there. Nobody else signed in. As someone who's hiked in the Adirondacks a lot, Josh and I will always check the trail register, and most people sign in, but every now and then we're like, oh, cool, like we're the first ones here today. And then you go on the trail and you bump into somebody who clearly did not sign in on the register because they're on their way out back to the trailhead. So not everybody signs in. So that's not really proof, but it's, these are just all factors to consider. So I don't know about this one. I just think it's interesting. It's recent. This doesn't seem like the type of guy who's not familiar with the wood sounds. So to have all these different characteristics, the rhythmic knocks, the dog acting up, the ambient sounds going silent, that feeling of being watched. Most people are going to hear knocks and be like, oh, what is that? Is that a woodpecker? Like it's not going to frighten them. It's not going to prick up the dog's attention. It's not. So all these things together push me a little bit more into the interested category versus, I'm not even going to read this because it's just a wood knock or it's just a howl. So interesting story. Curious to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comments below. Okay, story number 2. This is also from Lewis County. This is from July of 2000. Lewis County group of young hikers see large bipedal creature. So this happened July 11th in the year 2000. Location details. It was called Moose River Camp Trail. Nearest town is Lyon Falls. Observed. I was at camp at my cabin and went for a hike. We came into a swamp-like area and heard some twigs snap and smelled this awful smell and saw something moving in the trees ahead. The creature was dark, hairy, gorilla-like, and it was walking on 2 legs. It stopped for a moment and looked around, and then we ran out of the place. Later, my counselor told us it was just a bear, but bears aren't usually in a swamp or walk on 2 legs. Also noticed, ever since the incident, when I go on the trail, I feel like something is watching me, observing me, and it scares me. Other witnesses, there were 7 to 10 others. We were all talking and looking around and then saw the creature. Time was in the afternoon sometime. The sun was shining, so we could see a lot, and it was in a swamp. So there's a follow-up investigation here. It doesn't say who did the investigation, but they say, I spoke with the witness and her father. On July 11th, 2000, while on a hike during summer camp, a group of approximately 10 girls observed in a clearing a large bipedal black creature. They observed such for approximately 1 to 2 minutes from a distance of approximately 100 yards. When one of the young girls screamed, it stopped and looked at them. They immediately fled the area. She was instructed by the counselor, as were all the other children, that what they had seen was a bear. However, witness pointed out that the creature did not have ears like a bear, but rather the ears could not be seen. It is also unlikely this was a bear because they observed it over a minute and observed it to walk some distance on 2 legs. It is my hypothesis that the counselor was saying this to quell any monster stories back at the camp and prevent panic. The witness is extremely convincing, and upon speaking with her father, stated that she has steadfastly stuck to what she saw. So an interesting encounter, and we're going to get to another swamp story in a bit. But here you have, young girls. They're at summer camp. They went for a hike. They're kind of in a swampy area. And she's saying they see a dark, hairy, gorilla-like creature walking on 2 legs. It stopped for a moment and looked around. So this doesn't sound like a bear. Just because something is dark and hairy doesn't mean it's a bear. And then you have the counselors being like, no, you just saw a bear. And again, I understand that you have young children. You don't want to scare them and be like, oh, yeah, you probably saw Bigfoot. But just when people see these things that are bipedal, looking around, there's no ears. Again, a bear has ears. It has a snout. And most people, when they say they see Bigfoot, they're not seeing any ears. They're seeing a cone-shaped head. They're seeing a flat face, a flat nose. It's like kind of the opposite of what a bear looks like. So really interesting that they're seeing this thing and it walks. And then, it's walking on 2 legs. It stops, it looks around, keeps walking, and they all run. And again, kids can be easily frightened, but you'd think they'd know what a bear looked like. And it wouldn't be walking on 2 legs. Bears in the wild don't really go up on 2 legs except to like reach something, maybe for intimidation tactics, to look around maybe, but they're they stand up and then they go back down. They're not walking on those 2 legs. And again, I'm throwing up that photo here of a bear standing up, and it does not look like Bigfoot. It does not look like what they're talking about. Gorilla-like, walking on 2 legs. Just really interesting. So this is a good sighting. It's daytime. The sun is shining. They can see clearly. It's from 100 yards, but from 100 yards, you probably wouldn't even see a bear. It would be crawling on 2 legs. And even if it stood up, it's going to go back down to run off. It's not going to keep walking on 2 legs and look around. Just does not sound like a bear. Could this have been a man in a ghillie suit? Could this have been a man just dressed darkly? It could have been. I'm not saying that it definitely was, but it could have been a man, especially from 100 yards. But why would some guy be skulking around in a swamp like that? Just weird. So a good sighting here. All right, story number 3 comes from Oneida County. This man recounts childhood incident at his home on Oneida Lake. This one comes to us from October of 1972, October 28th. So, uh, 53 years ago. Location details. This occurred along the shore of eastern Lake Oneida, adjacent to the southern boundary of Verona Beach State Park. Nearest town is Verona Beach. Nearest road is Highway 13. And observed, this is a little bit long, so just stick with me here. And witness says, when I was 11 years old, I was living with my mother and stepfather in upstate New York. Our home was on the shores of Oneida Lake and bordered the southern boundary of Verona Beach State Park. One evening, shortly before Halloween, I'd gone to bed late, about 10 p.m. The window in my bedroom was directly behind the headboard of my bed, and one of only 3 street lamps beamed light through this window. The height of the bottom of the window frame was approximately 6 feet above the ground. My bedroom window was also the only window in the house that faced our neighbor's house. The neighbor's house was about 8 to 10 feet away with no French between the properties. I don't know what he means there. On this particular night, the light from the street light shone brightly into my bedroom and lit the entire room well enough to almost be able to read by its light. A few minutes after going to bed, a figure moved into the light and cast a huge shadow on the opposing wall of my room. I amassed that this figure had to be standing within only a few feet of my bedroom window due to the sharpness and size of the shadow. So it wasn't just a vague shadow. It sounds like he's seeing something very sharp and big. Also, considering the size of the shadow and the height of my window above the ground, the figure had to stand at least 7 to 8 feet tall to cast such a shadow. I froze in my bed, and embarrassingly enough, I had wet myself in fright. I could not muster the strength to look out the window. I simply froze. The shadow remained for all of about 20 to 30 seconds, then it was gone. About 3 to 4 minutes later, I heard a very loud crash of wood and metal as someone or something had ripped off the door to our back storage room. I heard someone or something moving items, then I heard the big freezer chest open and the toys I had left on the freezer fall to the ground. Again, I was still frozen with fear and in my bed and could not move. There were some loud bumps and bangs as if something was throwing bricks around the storage room. Our storage room was approximately 16 feet by 32 feet and attached to the backside of our lakeside of the house. After the banging stopped, the freezer lid slammed shut and all banging stopped. Later that night, my stepdad and mom had come home from work around 3 a.m. They owned the restaurant a few blocks away and started screaming, and my mom was very, very panicked. My mom called one of her friends that was also a good customer and was a state trooper. I don't know what was said between them. The next morning, my stepdad and 2 of his friends were trying to fix the door to the back room. This is when I first saw the damage done. The room looked as if it were turned upside down, then right side up. My stepdad's large rollaway toolbox was on its side and on the other side of the room, and packages of frozen meat were all over the place. A car transmission had been tossed as if a toy. The freezer had some faint scratches on the side and on the lid, but no tool marks or pry bar marks. My parents normally kept the freezer locked. These same scratches were located on the side of the house and the removed door. Missing were packages of my mom's frozen strawberries and 2 frozen turkeys. None of the prepackaged steaks or hamburgers or lobsters were taken. They used this freezer as a backup to the freezer at the restaurant. The state trooper friend of my mom's said it looked like 3 or 4 people had to have done this, but could not offer any explanation to the faint scratch marks. When I told my mom of the shadowy figure, my mom would only start to cry and hug me, saying we were so lucky that God had protected me from this situation. Of note was the conversation between my stepdad and our neighbor. Our neighbor told my stepdad that he too had seen some kind of shadowy figure moving between the houses. Our neighbor said he had tried to let his dog out to investigate, but the dog would not go outside. So again, very interesting animal behavior. But as soon as the figure appeared, it had gone away and had gone back to watching TV. Our neighbor did not hear any of the knocking or bangs in our back room. At this age, I had not ever heard of Bigfoot, but later, the next spring, the other boys were talking about a monster called Bigfoot that had been seen on TV, and for the first time since that night, I froze again in fear for a few seconds this time, and somehow knew what they were talking about and what they were describing. Also noticed, our large storage room had been broken into by a very large and strong quote-unquote person. Scratches were observed on the door in our large chest-type freezer, but no pry marks or tool marks found around where the door had been torn off its hinges. Other witnesses, our neighbor at the time, I can't remember his name, and my stepfather, so they saw the aftermath, really. Our neighbor was awakened by the same shadow that I saw, and my stepfather observed the damage to the back room. Other stories, I had not heard of anything else like this occurrence other than reports from my parents that other homes had been broken into. Some of the homes were summer homes, and that each time food or food items were taken. This was about 10 p.m. at night. Lighting was moderate, and the weather was chilly and no precipitation or wind. The area is heavily wooded with pine forest, and at that time, a few small homes located on the shores of the lake. There's a very short follow up investigation here by BFRO investigator Mary Mallon, and she says, I spoke with the witness at length, and although the incident happened several years ago, he could recall vivid details and emotions from the occurrence. He seemed very credible and sincere. So this one is interesting. Again, a skeptic is going to come in and say this was a bear. And superficially, it does sound like a bear. You know, something broke in. I don't think it was a person. This is 10 p.m. at night. The houses are pretty close to one another. So even if it were a person thinking there's no one in this home, you got to figure there's another house just feet away, 8 to 10 feet away. So why would you go into this house and make such a commotion? Because the neighbor might hear if you're breaking in. And why would you break in to get food? You're not going to break in to get a frozen turkey. You're going to break into the house proper, maybe to get valuables and also to get food if you're hungry. But places like these are low crime. Again, doesn't mean it's impossible, but unlikely. So then we move to bear. Could it have been a bear? It could have been, but again, from the damage he's talking about, from the things that threw around, a car transmission, that it's ripping the door off its hinges. And it doesn't sound like this bear was working at the door for a long time. It's just almost like walked up to the door and just ripped it off its hinges. And a black bear is not going to be able to do that. You know, you talk grizzly, Kodiak, polar bear, maybe, but they don't have any of those in New York. It's black bear, and the black bear in New York don't get very big. They're not huge. I mean, of course, there's always outliers, and it's possible this was a huge bear, but I still doubt any bear could just walk up to a door like that and just rip it off its hinges and then throw a car transmission around. It's going to go right for the refrigerator, the freezer. So why is it moving all these things? It's going to go right for where the food is. This just seemed like it was an angry something that was just tearing the place apart. I'm a little on the fence about this one, but the big shadow, again, if a bear is walking and his window is 6 feet above the ground, a street light shining from above is not going to cast a shadow into his room. So something had to be walking by the window. Again, it's not going to be a bear walking on two legs. The bear would be walking on all fours, and a black bear on all fours, 3, maybe 4 feet at the shoulder. And that's a big bear at 4 feet. You know, there's going to be closer to 3 feet at the shoulder. So I don't know what to make of this one. He was a child. He was home alone. He'd be a little scared. His perceptions could be off a little bit, but I don't think so. I think the shadow rules out a bear. So now you're talking it's either a person or it's Bigfoot. And a person is not going to rip the hinges off a door. It's not going to make this huge commotion with neighbors right next door. Again, if this was some abandoned farmhouse in the middle of nowhere and he thought nobody was home, yeah, go nuts. But you got neighbors 10 feet away, doesn't make sense to me. So I'm not saying it's definitely Bigfoot, but I'm leaning towards that possibility. So let me know what you guys think of this one. Okay, so our last story for this episode. Man recalls incident as a child in a swampy area near Cazenovia, and this is from Madison County. This also happened a while back, summer of 1970. Nearest town is Cazenovia. Nearest road is Oxbow Lane, and observed. They say, my memory of this is a bit foggy, as I was, I believe, 7 when it happened, and I'm 37 now. At the time, my family was living in Cazenovia, New York. I would often hike way back out in the swamps behind our house with a friend to make forts, etc. So, like last week's episode, we had Josh from Pennsylvania, and he was, a teenager, and they had a fort in the woods, and he was on his way to the fort when he encountered something. So just typical young boy behavior, even young girls. They continue. We would tear the bark off of dead elm trees to make paths for what seemed like very long distances. So they're kind of leaving breadcrumb trail. One day, a friend and I were quite a distance out in the swamp, chopping away at a rotted fallen tree with hammers when we heard a loud noise. Looking around, we saw a very large, dark form that appeared to be a man walking through the swamp very near us. I will never forget the surge of adrenaline and abject fear that I felt. We dropped everything and turned and ran as fast as possible home without looking back. My parents were angry as I had left a hammer there. I refused to go back for quite a while until my older brother accompanied me. I didn't think about this incident too much over the years until later when I have heard people describe Bigfoot sightings in terms of it looked like a very big man wearing a black raincoat. This is exactly the description I would give. I don't know, it just seems odd. Why would a man have been alone out in a swamp like that and never said a word to us? Makes you wonder. Also noticed, it seemed there was a loud noise at the time of the incident, like a scream. Other witnesses, there's just these two kids, 7 years old, playing in the swamp, mild weather. So there's a follow-up here by BFRO investigator Matt Moneymaker. And he says, a common element of encounters like this involve the witnesses making a loud banging sound in the forest prior to the encounter. People are most often making loud banging sounds in forests when chopping wood. The next most common circumstance is when they are hammering something. Many longtime Bigfoot field researchers and investigators say these animals occasionally make loud banging sounds, so tree knocks, which sound like a large stick being pounded against a tree trunk. It is believed they do this to signal to their companions for various strategic purposes. Usually 3 or 4 knocks are heard in succession. The sound is much louder than the sound of a woodpecker and is clearly done with a significant amount of force. Often reply knocks are heard from a different direction. This is referred to as wood on wood or wood knocking, even though sometimes it sounds more like large rocks being pounded together. It has been observed that the knocking sounds don't startle deer very much. Thus, it is believed that Sasquatches make this sound when taking up positions while stalking deer herds. Again, a lot of assumptions by Mr. Moneymaker. That's his theory. I don't necessarily subscribe to it. But this is interesting to me too, because they're seeing a very similar thing as the earlier story. They're in a swampy area, and they see a large, dark, humanoid figure walking through the woods. So let's talk bear, because everybody wants, skeptics always want to say you saw a bear. These are kids who are hammering. They're chopping wood. That when bears, especially in New York and other, black bears, they hear sounds of humans and they run. They do not want to encounter humans. They're not aggressive like that. Rarely. Again, there's always an outlier. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but we talk about probabilities here, and the probability that this being a bear, one, it's standing up. They thought it was a man walking. So not even just standing, just upright and walking. They're chopping wood. They're making loud noises, and they're 7. These are not quiet human beings. Anybody who knows a 7-year-old, they are not quiet. They make noise. They talk. They laugh. They giggle. They scream. When they talk to you, I'm constantly telling my niece, like, use your indoor voice, use your indoor scream, because she wants to talk to me, and I'm like, I'm right here. You don't I'm not 6 blocks away, but she'll, Jay, Uncle Jay, and she screams, and I'm like, use your indoor voice. And it's cute as hell, but I'm just saying, you have 7-year-olds in the woods. They're not there being subtle and quiet and appreciating the sounds of nature. They're out there and they're chopping wood and they're laughing. A bear is going to run off. It's not going to just walk near them. Secondly, they make a good point. Why would a man in the woods see these kids and just not say anything? It's just very weird. So another good sighting. These are kids who see something, and kids know what a bear looks like, and they're thinking it's a man. They're thinking it's a person. They're not really thinking Bigfoot at the time. And they say this. I didn't think about this incident too much over the years until later, when I've heard people describe Bigfoot sightings in terms of it looked like a very big man wearing a black raincoat. Could it have been a man in a ghillie suit? Sure. It just seems weird. Why wouldn't this guy kind of try to signal to the kids, like, hey kids, I'm here? Who knows? But I think a good sighting, not saying it's Bigfoot, but just very similar to the previous sighting, similar to Josh's sighting from last week. I will link to that episode down below. It's a very cool story. But again, you're talking, it's either a man in a suit or it's Bigfoot. It's not a bear. It's not any other sort of type of animal. They thought it was a man. So let me know what you guys think of this one. I think this is a very cool one. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching once again. Uh, 4 Bigfoot stories from New York State. And curious to hear what you guys think about these. Again, a few of them I'm on the fence about, but I think they're good stories. And I think they just kind of add to the database of just people are seeing something in upstate New York and in all parts of the country and the world. So let me know what you guys think of these. If you have had a Bigfoot sighting in New York or elsewhere, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. I'm happy to have you on the show or just relate your story. A lot of people reach out to me and I just read their stories on the air because they don't want to be on camera or they don't want their voice out there. And last week, Josh, he didn't want to be on camera, but he spoke, I could have related his story, but he was gracious enough to come on the show. He just didn't want to be on camera, and that is fine. So yeah, if you have a story, Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, anything weird and odd, let me know. And until next time, everybody, question everything. Were these kids seeing Bigfoot in the woods, in the swamps, or was these just men in ghillie suits, hunters? Were the tree knocks Bigfoot, or were they just other hikers making noise? Who knows? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And as always, everybody, embrace the weird, question everything, and we'll see you next week. Rock and roll, everybody.